Hi everyone, I hope you're well. So I'm going to start today with a reading from Psalm 18 and I'm reading from my trusty old NIV. Psalm 18, for the director of music, of David the servant of the Lord. He sang to the Lord the words of this song when the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. He said, I love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge. He is the shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call to the Lord, who is worthy of praise, and I am saved from my enemies. The cords of death entangle me. The torrents of destruction overwhelmed me. The cords of the grave coiled around me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress, I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came before him, into his ears. The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils, consuming fire came from his mouth, burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering, his canopy around him, the dark rain clouds of the sky. Out of the brightness of his presence, clouds advanced, with hailstones and bolts of lightning. The Lord thundered from heaven, the voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemies, great bolts of lightning, and routed them. The valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of the earth laid bare. At your rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of breath from your nostrils. He reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. So the theme of today's little message is the idea of refuge and rest. And as we read Psalm 18, and in fact a number of others David's Psalms, it conveys this sense of peace, security and deliverance that the author David found in God. And today I want to start looking at this theme by sharing with you a photograph. And it's actually the photograph that is currently sitting as the banner image for the channel. So here it is. Notice the small church nestled behind the headland towards the top right of the image. This is St Wynwallow, also known as the Church of the Storms, and I think you can see why. This is a very special place to me and indeed my family. It's special not just because it's such a beautiful spot, not just because the church is lovely and peaceful, not just because it's been a site of Christian worship for over 1,000 years. It's special because it was my happy place. During a period of great stress, when I was awake at night, battling my anxieties, to calm myself, this is where I would imagine myself to be, seated in one of the old wooden pews, listening to the wind and waves, looking at the sunlight filtering through the windows, and trying to focus on God. In a sense, in my mind at least, it was a place of refuge. But of course, Special though this place is, it's not really my refuge. And I'm reminded of that reading the Psalm of David's again this morning, that places aren't really my refuge. God is my refuge. But David uses a picture of different kinds of places to express that aspect of his relationship with God. In verse 2 of the psalm, he calls the Lord his rock, fortress, his rock in whom he takes refuge, his shield, his stronghold. And I want to look at the ideas that these words convey and what they express about finding that refuge and rest in God. When I think of the idea of a refuge, I'm reminded of the huts that you see up in the mountains. We call them bothies in England, but these are places that climbers, walkers can find shelter and refuge if they get caught out in bad weather or overnight on the hills, and they protect them from those harsh conditions. Sadly, in our society, we see other kinds of refuge as well, don't we? I'm thinking of the refuges for women who've been the subject of abuse. So this idea of the refuge is somewhere that provides shelter from the storm, from danger, from trouble, from threat. There was a game we used to play when we were on holiday, myself and the kids. So we'd be on the beach with the tide coming in, and we'd find a rock of suitable size and shape. And as the waves approached, we would stand near this rock. And as the wave came crashing in, rushing up the shore, we'd all jump on the rock. And we used to try and cling on to each other, holding each other on the rock, staying out of the waves and the water. And of course, sometimes people didn't quite make it. Sometimes people were less than helpful in terms of getting others onto the rock. The other thing I think about with the rock is the mountains again. So another one of my favourite places is Snowdonia. And there's a place on one of the peaks, on one of the mountains, called the Castle of the Wind. I won't try and pronounce it in Welsh. But it's this spiky outcrop of rock. And you can see how it gets its name. It looks like almost a naturally formed castle. And you can climb and scramble to the top of this. It's really hard to get to and scramble up. So you have this idea of, when we think about the rock, we think about somewhere that's an immovable foundation, that's dependable when the waters rise. Like the man in the parable that Jesus tells, who built his house upon the rock. You also get this idea of a place of safety, a place where you're beyond the reach of harm, high up and out of the way, a place of security and defence. I love a good castle, and we're blessed with some particularly good ones here in the UK. I think of Carnarvon and Beaumaris over in Wales, and of course in England we've got the Tower of London. And up in Northumberland there's Alnwick and Bamborough. And then of course in Scotland they've got some great castles, and Edinburgh of course is perhaps one of the most famous. And you go around these places and you look up at the towering thick walls, the keeps and the gates and the drawbridges, and you think of the near impossibility of trying to assault and take a place like that. So fortress is a place of strong defence against enemy attack. The final idea I want to look at today is actually drawn from a couple of other psalms, one of which is David's and one of which is anonymous. So Psalm 61 verse 4, I long to dwell in your tent forever and take refuge in the shelter of your wings. Psalm 91 verse 4, he will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. So when we think of the idea of a bird sheltering its chicks, of course the common image that comes to mind is the mother hen. And sometimes you can see them on the nest, can't you, with all the little fluffy yellow chicks peeping out from underneath, but protected by mum. The other idea that comes to my mind comes from watching programmes like Spring Watch on TV, these wildlife programmes, when you get some poor cameraman stuck up in the highlands of Scotland in the drizzle getting eaten alive by midges, just to get these wonderful pictures of an eagle or an osprey or some wonderful bird like this on its nest with its little fluffy chicks. And you see these magnificent birds of prey and their little defenceless chicks, and you think, yeah, I wouldn't mess with them personally. So that's the way I think of us. We're sort of the little helpless chicks sheltering under the wing of our strong, protective Father God. So why is it that sometimes we just don't feel like we're in that place of refuge, in that place of safety with the Lord? Well, speaking personally, I think it's usually because I'm focusing on the wrong thing. I'm focusing on my situation, on my problems, and maybe I'm trying to take refuge in the wrong thing. I'm trying to distract myself with the TV or something of that sort. And how, if we need to, do we find ourselves in that place of refuge, in that place of rest? Well, surely it's about lifting our eyes up to the Lord and doing those things which really help us achieve that. So it's about worship, it's about prayer, it's about reading his words. Finally, at this time, when I can't be with my brothers and sisters, I realise just how much the support of loving brothers and sisters, their fellowship, their friendship means to me in terms of finding my way into that place with the Lord. So real rest, real peace is really only found in God. Earthly refuges fail due to storm, wind, landslide. Earthly rocks crumble or are worn down by water and weather, cracked by frost. Earthly fortresses can be besieged and breached. Earthly parents do their best and can be a blessing, but they're only human. God, however, is perfect and will never fail. Being our rock, our protector, is part of who he is. So let's try and do those things which help us take our eyes off our situation and focus on him and take hold of this truth and find our refuge, find our rest in God. Talk to you again soon.